Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank Victor and Andrew for inviting me here. It is a privilege, it's an honor to participate in the inaugural Global Asia Dialogue. It is good to know that sometimes mix-ups happen also in these global dialogues. My topic for speaking tomorrow at a panel is the challenge of urbanization. Today, I was asked to speak on the role of India in the new global economy. So I shall stay with the topic that was given to me. As you know, India has been one of the fastest growing economies in the world over the past 2 decades. But to put things in perspective, India's interface with the global economy is much less than China's. If we take the change between 2000 and 2011, for example, and look at the contribution to global GDP, China's contribution increased from 3.7% to 10.5%, and India's increased from 1.5% to 2.4%. China's economy is more than 4 times the size of India's. The absolute contribution of the Indian economy to world GDP is therefore much smaller. But there are important ways in which India has both contributed to the global GDP and also exploited opportunities in the global marketplace. India was very apprehensive before we started engaging with the global economy. As you know, for a long period after our independence, India really fostered a regime of heavy protection, high degree of domestic regulation, and public sector dominance. Today, with this experience of the past 2 decades, India not only recognizes the importance of interdependence in the new global economy, but feels that we can benefit by engaging with the world economy. We must therefore help reform the institutions of global governance as we engage more and more with the rest of Asia, where the future of the global economy lies. But we must first and foremost lift our own burden. We must lift our people from the low levels of income and poverty to middle income levels and beyond. India made a radical break in 1991 from its past policies of inward orientation and started a process of opening up to trade and foreign investment. The growth response emerged a decade later as the cumulative impact of the gradualist reforms began to be felt on the investment climate. In the last decade, our average growth of GDP was of the order of 8+% per annum. I would like to highlight 5 important aspects of the economic reform process in India to provide a context in which we can talk about India's role in the global economy. We started on economic reforms 20 years after China and have performed very well, actually beyond the expectations of many. Our reforms were gradual because in a democracy, you have to build consensus along the way. The reforms were carried out at the center and in different state governments by different political parties and their combinations that were in power. The result is that reforms have acquired wide ownership and acceptance across the political spectrum. This is very important in a democracy. The success of Indians in the IT sector in the industrialized world, particularly in the USA, and the development of a vibrant, competitive IT industry in Bangalore and around, meant that non-resident Indians and their Indian partners in the IT sector became an important voice in modernizing the Indian economy and helping it to become globally competitive. Private sector has been a major player in the Indian growth story. The acceleration in economic growth was led by the private sector. The Indian private sector waited and watched as the reforms were unfolding during the 1990s. Once they were convinced that reforms are there to stay, the decade of 2001 to 2011 saw a strong pickup in private investment. The success of IT was followed by the promise in financial services and health services sectors. In manufacturing, we had pharmaceuticals, auto components, and more recently, automotive sector, which showed their competitive strength. Slowly, as more and more sectors emerged to show their presence in the global marketplace, skepticism gave way to confidence. An important point to note is that in the more recent period, growth has become more broad-based across many more states than was the case in the 1990s when reforms were first launched. As growth has accelerated, poverty has declined. Poverty, as defined officially by the government, has declined at a much faster pace in the last decade than ever before. However, as aspirations are rising, now there is a lot of controversy about poverty. Should we not redefine poverty at a higher level? While that is so, it is also true that no matter where we draw the poverty line, we will need faster and sustained growth for poverty to decline. Inclusion has emerged as a major concern in the last 10 years. Because growth was accelerating, the government was able to spend its buoyant revenues on education, health, social protection. But today, some questions have arisen on whether we may be taking growth for granted. How we need to balance between continued growth, continued sustained growth, sustainable growth, and inclusion. So what were the challenges in the last 10 years as we saw economic growth accelerating? The good old challenge of infrastructure development to keep pace with the requirements of growth was very much there. In some sectors, we were able to make a big difference, like in telecommunications. In other sectors, like electricity, we are still struggling with reforms and public-private partnership to see that we can deliver adequate quantity and quality of electricity to meet our rising growth needs. Another challenge, which actually worried a lot of people was the challenge of macroeconomic management in an open economy framework. This was an area where we had come out for the first time, and as we integrate with the global economy and as we accelerate our pace of economic development, will we be able to manage a macroeconomic environment which was stable? On that, both on the side of fiscal reforms and in the area of monetary policy, which was a much more challenging area, I am very happy to say that one of our stalwarts who actually steered the economy through that is the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, who is sitting amongst us, and he's going to be talking about this tomorrow. At the same time, there were some new challenges that appeared in the last decade in India. First, the challenge of urbanization. This was an area which was much neglected, and because industrial growth had been very slow in the earlier period, we did not really see that much migration coming from the rural to urban areas. Even today, India's degree of urbanization is much smaller than in most other countries. We have only 30% of our population, which is urban, compared with close to 50% in China, more than 70% in Korea, more than 80% in Brazil. So we have a long way to go as we accelerate our pace of development and growth. We will see much more of migration, and we will need to invest in our cities, which will be the engines of growth for the next 2, 3, 4 decades. And we need to invest in our cities in a sustainable manner. So when we talk about environmental protection, when we talk about stability, very often the dialogue used to get reduced to how the industrialized world has polluted the planet, and now they want us to do things right. But as we get into this stage of urbanization, building our cities, we recognize that we need to invest in our cities in a sustainable manner for our own public health requirements. We don't need to do this to do a favor to anyone else. It is in our self-interest that we do our urban planning right. We have transit-oriented planning. We accommodate housing in a manner so that we don't congest our cities. Because when we go into cities, we are looking for agglomeration economies. As we create cities, we have to ensure that congestion diseconomies do not offset the economies of agglomeration. So that's a new challenge that we are struggling with. The government of India has a major mission called the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which has been addressing these challenges. But as of now, it is a very small drop in a large ocean of problems that we have to cope with. And this task has to be done together with the state governments and local governments, who have to be empowered, mandated, and funded to build the cities right. A second new challenge that has come up, which we never heard about in India earlier, is that of skill deficit. In the past, when we were growing at 5.5% per year, we thought we had enough scientists and enough engineers to last us forever. We just needed to see our economy grow at 8+% per annum for 10 years to recognize that industry and services sectors were screaming skill deficits. And now we have a national skill development initiative in which public-private partnership is being used to see that skills are developed to match where there are demands coming up. And that's a new challenge that Indian economy has faced. There are some major concerns. We have had inadequate progress on employment, and this has to do with a whole range of policies of the industrial sector, our labor laws, and a number of the things that I will not go into. A second very important concern is that of institutional reforms. Now, at this stage, I would like to say that when you have an economy growing at as rapid a pace as India has grown in the last 10 years, you see structural transformation where people are moving, new sectors are emerging, and you have a need for regulatory environment, you have need for new laws, so you need institutions of legislature, institution of judiciary, institution of regulatory environment, all of that to be reformed to keep pace with the new economy that is emerging. Now, on the face of it, when institutions take time to adapt and adjust, it seems as if there is collapse of governance, especially in a democracy, in a society where media is open and debate and discussion is part of our nature and life. So we have witnessed quite a bit of that, and there are serious concerns on the governance front. But the way I view it is that when you cross the sound barrier and you move to a new atmosphere, there will be turbulence. And until you find a new equilibrium, until you have done institutional reforms, if you didn't see turbulence, that would show that you actually had not really moved. In our case, the per capita income growth just before economic reforms were launched was about 3.5% per year. Today, it is close to twice that rate in a short period of 20 years. So it is only to be expected that institutions will take time to adjust, and the entire society, the media, the civil society, the private sector, the government, everybody is engaged in a process of negotiations to see how the new set of institutions can be evolved, which can deal with a market-oriented economy, but with critical regulations, enforcement of law, so that the rules are transparent and clear. The final major concern with sustaining this high growth rate is that of the adverse external economic environment, where protectionism is rising in the industrialized world. Energy prices are crucial to us when we look at our engagement with the global economy. In fact, in the 5 years prior to the global financial crisis, the Indian economy grew at 9% per annum on average. And in the aftermath of the crisis, there has been a slowdown and a question in the minds of the observers on whether this slowdown is cyclical or is the economy moving to a lower growth rate in the medium run. I have partly answered this question by saying that I think the long-term potential of the Indian economy remains at 8 to 9%, but let me just explain what I mean when I say the long-term potential remains where it is. We are already in the process of reorienting our trade and external engagement towards Asia, where we see the future. In South Asia, there is today better regional integration, and India is taking a leading part in bringing that about. The latest good news is when Pakistan has actually agreed to give an MFN status to India with a negative list rather than a huge positive list. Now, this is a very, very significant development in the region. We are engaged with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka to, again, further the process of trade and investment integration in South Asia. In Southeast Asian countries, we have free trade agreements with a number of countries, the latest being Thailand. There is an ASEAN-India Eminent Persons Group that has been set up by the governments of our countries, and I have the privilege to be a member of that group, in which we are seriously applying our mind to see how we can bring better and faster integration with the ASEAN economies. New opportunities have been opened up in Myanmar. It opens up trade routes to Thailand and to other Southeast Asian economies. Our Prime Minister is currently, in fact, he just returned today from Myanmar, a visit to Myanmar, and there are several agreements that we are signing and moving ahead. In the region as a whole in Asia, if we offer a large market and we are a deficit economy, there are surpluses in China and in other economies. There are possibilities of give and take. There are possibilities of financial intermediation so that we can bring the economies together. And then India has large autonomous engines of growth which need to be put on track. I already mentioned urbanization. In a committee on urban infrastructure and services that I chaired, and we submitted our report to the Government of India last year, we estimated that you need $800 billion of investment to bridge urban infrastructure investment deficit over a 20-year period, much of it with public-private partnership. Now, that is one area of engagement where we can benefit from the expertise in the rest of Asia, and a lot of action is waiting. A second autonomous engine of growth for us is our young population, which will continue to rise. The percentage of working age population in the total population will continue to rise until 2050. This is a demographic opportunity that we have to turn into a dividend with empowering the youth with skills and providing an investment climate in which they can be gainfully employed or used to innovate. We have to continue to focus on innovation and knowledge creation and sharing in our economy. So as we capitalize on these trends, I see India delivering on the rising aspirations of our youth. Today, 50% of our population is below the age of 25. And those who were born in 1991 when economic reforms were first launched are 21 years old today. This young population has seen growth rising from 5.5% to 6.5% to 7.5% to 8% in the last 20 years. They are restless for more, and no matter what the immediate challenges may be to any government, no matter what the political compulsions of coalitions or otherwise may be, the strength of a democracy is that when a majority of the population wants development, growth, and inclusion, the politicians get the message that they have to deliver if they have to survive. So I am very optimistic on the medium-term growth prospects for India as we engage more and more with Asia and with the world economy. And I have no doubt that dialogues like this enable us to take away lessons from each other and help us to really do knowledge sharing with our own policymakers in our own countries. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia. If I could ask you to stay on the stage, if I might. I have a question for you, and I know some in the audience might as well. Many in the business community, I think, have been frustrated by India's reforms stalling in the last year, in particular the last few months. And some people think that as New Delhi seems to be paralyzed right now, we may see state-by-state reforms. Do you think that that's true?
I think that is absolutely true. In fact, there is a lot of gloom at the macro level, but in the area in which I work, which is urbanization, and I travel a great deal to states and small cities and towns, things are thriving. I mean, some states are going full throttle, and more states are looking over their shoulders to see what they could do to get there. But you are right that in the investment sentiment at the central level, there's been some setback. I am convinced that we will overcome this particular hurdle because the real action is in the states.
Oh, that's very interesting. All right. And we have